Hi, I'm Corey. Welcome to Creating with Scraps. This is the second in the series of Life Simplified, a journal organizer planner that I've created for 2025. And this is more of a learn from my mistakes and what not to do. I made some really common mistakes that I've made in the past and that I'd forgotten about as I created this journal. And my purpose in coming on and sharing it now is if you haven't started your process yet, for those of you who are wanting to make an organizer planner style journal, I am sharing these so hopefully you can overcome some of the pitfalls that I ran into. Some of them are common, some of them are things you just don't really think about until you're actually making it. And so I wanted to share those with you and hopefully prevent you from being frustrated and doing some of the same things. All right, first off, categories. Now, I have shared this journal in the past that I made, and I used this as that concept, an organizer, journal, planner, all of the things, but I'm out of room. And I wanted to create another one, so that's what I did. I had started making it using some of that old yo-yo fabric that I had, and I had just the cover of this and thought I would use this and shared it with you, and even made a flower press insert. And all that's well and good, but I found a lot of things as I was going. First and foremost, the closure. I love the band with a button on it closure. This is the one that I use. Now remember, this is a day-to-day journal, in and out quick, put things in, receipts or messages or notes or whatever you need. You want to be able to access it quickly. So this, I can get in and out in a second. Unless of course I do what I just did. But it's really easy, it's really sturdy and fast. This is great, except it is not as easy to get in and out. With the button, you have to kind of open it and close it, and you have to open and close anything, but it's more fussy to get into, and especially once I start putting stuff in it and then making it a little bit fatter and then coming around and having to tuck it under. So it's not a deal breaker, but if I were to do this again, I would choose this type of a closure because I love it for a completely different style album, not necessarily this style album. Okay, that's another thing. This particular journal, I had put really thin chipboard in when I sewed in the front and the back cover. So this is woolen mill ends sewn onto a piece of canvas, because these are just strips. I sewed it onto a piece of canvas. And then when I made my spine insert, I had a large piece of just solid fabric, and I sewed the signatures into that, and then I sewed the whole thing into the book. But I have a little bit of roll up here because it's a soft spine and a soft cover, but it's not super soft. And it doesn't have a ton of roll because it's got a little bit more stability and support on the cover. On this journal, if you look, I didn't put, when I made the pockets on the inside, I just took some offcuts of that yo-yo and I put them down for the pockets. It is really flimsy. There is no stability. So what happened because of that is the roll is greater. You can see here my first and last signatures go way down into the page based on where the roll is. Now, as it gets thicker, if I had chipboard in here like this, and it would go a little bit thicker, it would be a little bit sturdier, and I wouldn't have quite that much roll. So that was something else that I learned. I chose to put 6 signatures and the flower press in there, and I cut the pages accordingly, knowing that you get displacement because of the type of the spine and because of the roll. But I didn't cut nearly enough off the page edges for this kind of a roll, and I wouldn't have had to do that if I had put some even just thin chipboard backing in there. So that was another lesson I learned. Okay, I've got myself notes so that I don't forget to share something with you. Another thing, I really like using an insert piece to sew my signatures in, whether you use a 5-hole pamphlet stitch or whatever signature insertion style you like. It works really well because you put your signature in your liner piece and then you put your liner piece in your journal. I do that quite frequently because it's my favorite way to do it. I can do the 5-hole pamphlet stitch, and I've done it many times, even on this channel, but it's not my favorite. I like sewing them in with my sewing machine. It gives me an even look. It's easy. I can make it as straight as I want, and it gives me a nice solid hold. I did that here, but I made a couple huge mistakes. First, the removable spine that I put in. It's just a thin piece of fabric, and I didn't make it nearly wide enough. Yes, it's wider than the signatures, but getting it in the journal, holding it in place, because there's no stability in here, it was really tough to do, to get in and get straight. And I didn't leave myself enough room to sew this in with my sewing machine. I had to use fabric glue. And I'm not a fan of fabric glue, and I know a lot of you guys love Fabri-Tac. I'm not a fan. So I got this Gorilla fabric glue, and it's super strong. It's great, but it is really, really hard to squeeze the glue. Really tough, and I'm fairly strong. And so don't love doing that either. So I had to glue it in. And because I didn't leave myself enough, I can't sew it with my sewing machine. So I can go back and finish this, and I will, but I'll have to hand stitch this in. That was another thing, because of the amount of roll and because of this insert. When I go in and hand stitch this in to make sure it stays, it's going to come down here and right here through my page. Now, because it's a straight line, it's not that big of a deal, but I've got to make darn sure, because I have a solid cover, or a solid color cover, that those stitches which are going to show, I'm going to want to make them straight. I don't have room on this side for my foot of my sewing machine to sew the, or it'd be tight, let's put it that way, to sew it down, and it's going to show through here, which I don't want. So that was another challenge that I ran into. The Gorilla fabric glue works really well to hold the spine in place, and I may get brave and get some pliers to squeeze it down and then just finish gluing it that way instead of sewing in my signature or in my spine signature, but it was something I wouldn't choose to do again. I would use a full piece, and I would have a little bit more stability with the cover. And I'd put even just the thin chipboard, packaging paper chipboard. I would put those in here because it would give me a much easier to make process of the journal, or it would provide that, and it would also give me a more satisfying result. Less frustrations when you're building it. But if you're looking for a really strong fabric glue, this works really, really well. It's just incredibly hard to squeeze. So that was another thing that I learned. Also, when I was putting this together, I sewed in my chipboard, and I tied it in a knot. Well, heck. I sewed the chipboard piece in first, thinking, okay, it's nice and sturdy. I'll put it in the center. I want it to go in the middle of my journal. And I'll start there, and then I'll build out on each side. 3 in front of that, 3 in the back of it. Sorry, with these new nails, getting a knot out is difficult. I had tied it in a knot when I was sewing everything in, so I didn't inadvertently tie the closure or sew the closure into my spine. Anyway, so I put this in first. I like it. I'm pleased with it. And it fit because it's at the center. So your displacement, the farthest piece from the back of the spine to the front of the cover is in the center because of the way it rolls, right? These ones on the right and on the left need to be a little bit shorter, but this one can be your longest. So I measured, and it fits in there really, really well. So that was good. But all the other pages that I fit, I had to cut several times, and I made several mistakes. For example, this is an insert that I made. One of the things I found when I was using this journal is that I really used these glassine envelope pockets quite frequently. I put stuff in there all the time because I could see what was in them. And when I was making, there's a couple in here somewhere. Oh, envelopes like this, I found I almost never used these because I couldn't see what was in them. So I learned from my choices, my previous choices, and in this new journal, I put things in that I could see through, so it'd be easy. Oh, there goes all the stuff in this one, which is why I need a new one. But I made it based on the size that I needed with this centerpiece, not the ones I needed on the subsequent pieces. So if I had put this here as I'd intended, look how much it's going to stick out. Now, it's not a big deal because I can easily, this is just baby's breath on the envelope flap of the glassine, and then I sewed window film transparency over it so that it wouldn't tear the baby's breath. I can use it in another project, but I was specifically making it for this one and it wasn't usable. Same idea here. I've got one in this journal and I'll show you. I had intended to put this way and it would have just fit. But once I put a seam spine in here, it would have been way too wide and I'll have to use it for something else. Another thing I did was, this is one of the rollover flaps. Well, I didn't leave myself. I needed to make another score line here so that this flap rolled over here because again, displacement causes that kind of buckling. So those are just, I'll be able to fix this and I'll be able to use it. But those are just things that are frustrating when you're making your journal and you just want to put it together and you run into these problems. So keep those things in mind as well. On that note, I'll try to open this up and show you. I used French ticking and it's beautiful, but I absolutely, if you're going to use something like this, I would absolutely encourage you to put it on a piece of thin chipboard or a packing material, or even cardboard's a little bit too flimsy, but something first, because what happens with fabric is it pulls easily. And when you've got lines like this and you pull them just a little bit, your stitches look really wonky. Now, like this first one looks pretty darn good. It's mostly straight. But when you progress into the journal, as I was sewing things and trying really hard to get them straight, you can see how not straight they are. See, here you go. This is a great example because the lines from the fabric show. Lesson learned, use a random pattern fabric or a solid color fabric. Things with lines like this are incredibly hard to get straight. Now, I know if you're sewing and you're just sewing something flat, it's a little bit different. But these, there's all kind of bulk and pull and push and such, and it just makes it extremely difficult to get a result. It's still usable, but if you're wanting an aesthetically pleasing straight line type thing, I would highly recommend putting this on something solid first, like gluing it down or sewing it down to a piece of chipboard, and then using it, and you're a lot more likely to get your lines straight. Instead, I should use, some canvas or any other fabric, like a random pattern fabric or something, or even paper. I could put paper behind this, thicker like card, and it would have made a big difference. So that was another thing that I learned as I was going. Oh, what else? What else? I know there's more. Let me make sure. Spine, I don't want to tell you too narrow, too wide. Closure was a pain. A roll. Oh, and then, truthfully, I believe mistakes are opportunities to learn. Can I make this work? Sure. Am I going to use it for this journal? No, absolutely not. There's just too many things that would make it challenging to use as I want it to be used. That doesn't mean it's not usable, but it would just be a journal that I wouldn't be in and out of all the time. I think I started to say this and I got sidetracked. So I sewed this in first, this really thick piece. The flower press that we created, right? And I really like the way it looks. Huge, huge mistake. Because this is really thick and really solid, it creates not only displacement, but it creates a barrier when I was sewing this in. Now, if I were using a standard 5-fold pamphlet stitch, it's still a challenge, but not as much. But because I'm using the sewing machine, it made it almost impossible. In fact, my machine, which is a fairly decent machine, balked and would not allow me to do it. I had to do the whole thing by hand. I mean, I had to roll the machine wheel, lever, up and down lever by hand, which was a royal pain. So next time I would put this in last. It would be my last piece. And I would also have a little bit more of a gap between the chipboard. You can keep the spine amount good, but I would probably shave 1/4 inch off each side on the chipboard because the spine is where your bulk is when you're sewing something in. Like I got this in no problem, but when I got these in, it was a lot bigger of a problem. It was a lot more of a pain. This one turned out okay because I did that one by hand, but some of the others did not. They are really crooked and really wonky. Another thing I learned, so I would put the thick piece in last and I would have a wider gap on my spine because of it. I used a variety of old ledger and new ledger and a variety of fun papers for this, and I really was happy with that. I forgot a super important rule. When you are using old paper, it tears. Like this is probably 100, 110 years old, something like that. It was in the early 1900s that was the date on this, but I have tear all over because the paper is fragile. So in many places, I've taken just some clear cellophane and taped it. But if I were to use, okay, now I've got it in, oh, here you go, and a lot of spots. But if I were to use this paper again as one of my paper selections, I absolutely would line it all first. Just take, you know, a newer paper or something and make yourself like a half-inch spine, fold it in half, and put it in to insert in there so that the signature seam is pulling at sturdier, newer paper rather than this fragile paper. You can't see it much in here, but oh, here you go. See how it's tearing away? It's because the paper's fragile. And that was a common problem. Now I can tape it and I can make it work, but it's just a hassle and would have been much easier if I had reinforced the edges of the center edges of the paper before I'd started. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So I also used, you know, the ledger paper here, and I had been sewing. Well, I really wanted to use some baby's breath, and because I really like the window film transparencies here. So you can see this is going to be glued on here as a little pocket. This is a small pocket, so whatever is in there will lift up the top, no problem. So I had made that, and I'd done the same thing over here. This one, I don't have a piece of paper right here. This is a pocket, and then it'll be a pocket. So again, I sewed window film transparency. I was sewing on glassine. I've made these before. It's been a while, but it's basically a window film pocket. So there's a pocket in here, and I can put it in, and it's still see-through. Just put some string around there to double tie the policy closure. So I sewed on transparency there. Oh, I have to put this back in. I found I had made a mistake and put this pocket on upside down. See, I told you if I could have made a mistake in this journal, I did. I put this pocket on upside down. So I took it off, and there was a tear on the paper, of course, because of course there was. So I printed the Einstein quote that originated my word of the year, Simplify, and covered up my mistake. And I was really pleased with it. And I put this little charm pen nib on there, and it was great, except the bulk of that little charm made it impossible to sew in the subsequent signatures. It was a royal pain, so I had to take that off. Now I can put it back on, and I will, but it is something to keep in mind. Always go with flat when at all possible when you're sewing in your signatures, because that bulk caused all kinds of displacement. So let's see, I think there's a couple other spots. Yeah, I used a transparency here and a little transparency here and here. And again, I did the same thing when I remade that envelope. I folded the envelope over and made it smaller so that it would fit, covered the glassine envelope flap with, put some flowers in there, and then covered it with a window film and sewed that on. Okay, because I did all of that, my sewing machine needles became really dull, really fast. And I think, in fact, because it was so bulky, I don't know if you can see it there, but both of them bent a little bit. So keep in mind, this is fine for sewing in transparency and paper and such, but when you're ready to sew it into your journal, you're going to want to put new needles in, because my machine had to work doubly hard to pierce it. So keep that in mind. On that note, when you are trimming down your pages, there's a couple different ways to do it, you know, because it's really difficult to get, you don't just make all your pages the same width because of the roll, right? So when you are doing that, when you're cutting them, you're cutting a whole bunch at once. So here we go. I'll show you what I mean. You can use an X-Acto knife or a cutting knife. You can use scissors, which I don't highly recommend, but you can. But you just take, you know, your pages. It's easy because it's a soft bound book, right? You lay your pages down and you realize you have to cut them down a little bit, right? And I use purple for paper and yellow for fabric. I only remember it because purple paper. Gotta love alliteration. You absolutely want a sharp blade, Paper dulls blades very, very quickly, and you are going to get torn, ratty edges on your paper if your blade is not sharp. If you rather use a craft knife, the same thing. I think the rotary trimmer is a little easier to hold when you're cutting your paper. You need a straight edge, of course, and you're going to hold it there and you're going to roll it. But you absolutely want a sharp blade. Make sure you have sharp blades on hand. And if you're doing the craft knife method, same exact thing. Hold this tight in place, but you want a sharp blade. Otherwise, it tears the paper crazily. Oh, good. And I just took the blade out of there because it twisted. Well, we'll put that back later. Okay, so that's something else to keep in mind. Sharp blades are your friend when you're doing this. And the soft spine makes that easy because I can roll it to cut the pages where I want. But again, I won't make it like this in the future. I will give something with just at least a little bit more stability, because this is a much, even though it's thin, this is a much sturdier journal than this. Again, if you're not writing in and put stuff in all the time, not a big deal. But if it's your daily use thing, not ideal in the least. I use thick pages, fabric glue, tears easily, paper choice. I went over that. The other thing, last thing, if you are going to use your sewing machine, make sure you extend your stitches. I got so frustrated with here you go, see? I got so frustrated with all of the challenges I came across that I forgot to extend the length of my stitch to make it as wide as it would go on my machine. And what happens then is all these little holes close together act as perforation, and you might as well just tear your pages out. And you can see here, my blade wasn't as sharp as it should have been because I've got that roll there. And I cleaned it up a little bit, but it still reminded me to make sure I'm using a sharp blade when I cut. Okay, I think that was all the mistakes that I made. I think that's plenty of mistakes for one. But I shared this for a couple reasons. One, to help you hopefully avoid some of the pitfalls that I ran into. But two, to show you that even in spite of all that, I can still use this journal. If you make mistakes, if you come across challenges, there is almost always a way around it. I did not sew a signature in upside down, but Lord knows I've done that as well. So don't, if you're running into challenges or it's not working the way you want, just remind yourself that there is a way to fix it. You can rearrange it and you can reuse it and redo it. And again, remind yourself to learn from your errors. There are opportunities to grow and learn. Okay, categories. I chose my categories. I have basically 8 sections for my journal. Because there's 6 signatures, I need one whole section for a certain category, another whole section for a certain category. Another category, I can use half of a section. I put 12 pages about each in each of these signatures. And you can see they're a little bit different because some of the paper's thinner, some of the paper's thicker. I think on one of them I didn't use 12 because of what I needed. And my sewing machine goes through that. But when you give any extra challenge to it, it makes it harder. And if you're putting in a lot at once and you're using the standard, if you're using a punch awl, a sharp punch and a book cradle or whatever it is you use, the more pages you have, the harder it is to get through. So do keep that in mind as you're deciding how many pages. For example, a composition book has a single signature. It's a big signature, but they have industrial machines. And that would be next to impossible for us to do because of the amount of pressure that you would need to do that. So keep that in mind when you're choosing the number of pages. The more pages you have, the more difficult it is for you to get it where you want it and to push the needle through. So, okay, sidetracked again. I wanted 6 signatures because of what I needed for my journal based on what I found that I used in the past. I keep track of books. I keep track of retreats. I keep track of challenges, collaborations, things that I mail. So those are some of the things that I needed and want to include. So I chose my signatures based on that. So before I even started my planner, I had to plan my planner, basically. I somewhere put my own list. Oh, here we go. My own list. But I did come up, we all have different things. So I did come up with some category and options that may work for you. And I'm going to leave that right there. So if you want to do a screenshot, you're absolutely welcome to. But my category options, and there are definitely more. These are just the ones that I was able to think of off the top of my head. Ideas and inspiration. I do not put my ideas and inspiration into this journal. That gets its own special book. I have a little flip out. This is last year's. I have an own little flip out where I write down my ideas. Here's a great one that I was just playing with. Use a moth wing as a dangle. Use a large moth die. I'm mentally planning my Girl of the Limberlost journal. And Jean Stratton Porter wrote that back in, I don't know, early 1900s. And it's set in northern Michigan, I believe, in the Limberlost. And butterflies and moths play a huge role in the story. So I want to use butterflies and moths when I'm creating the journal. So I was brainstorming ideas. And so I put these type of things in to my ideas and inspirations book, as well as pictures. Like, oh, I really like that. I want to make sure I include that. Or, oh, these slide specimens. Okay, here, great example. I think Carrie from Witchcraft Do You Do created these. And yeah, they use her stamps and her butterfly images. Well, how perfect could that be for a book about moths and butterflies? So I absolutely have images like this so that when I'm creating my own journal, I can come back and refer to this. So I use a combination of words and written ideas and images to put in my ideas and inspiration. And because that gets so thick and it's a very own unique category, I make my own journal for that. This was just in fact, I've started mine for this year. I got sidetracked because of finishing this Life Simplified journal. But here it is. This is just a mixed media paper book. Because it was blue and it's spiral bound, I don't want to take it off. I just took my Posca pen, I guess. You could use Sharpie, you could use whatever you want. And I colored this edge, and then I'll cover it with paper. I didn't want the blue, I wanted a black because I wanted a neutral cover. So I will use this. I'll have to take out some of the pages, but that's okay because I can use that paper in my junk journaling. It's just mixed media paper, and I'd had this on hand. So, and it's the same type of thing. I actually prefer the little bit wider spirals, but this is what I had last year, so that's what I used. So my ideas and inspiration, for some people, that'll go directly in your Life Simplified journal. For me, that wasn't the greatest choice. So there is that. Okay, but you might want to include that. Addresses. The people I write to all the time, now I have an address book, but that's another place. And the idea is to make it simplified. So I have a section in here of addresses of people I mail to frequently. So I wanted to include that. That's one of the things that might work for you. Remember, I gave myself a challenge this year to send a card a week. Just a random thinking of you card. Maybe I'll put a coffee gift card in it, or a crumble cookie gift card, or just a piece of ephemera or something, depending on who's getting it. But I want to be really intentional about doing that. And so I need a section in my journal to make sure that I'm tracking that and doing it. Quotes. When I come across a quote I like to include those. So I put that in there. Collaborations. Now, maybe you don't participate in collaborations, so this wouldn't be a category that you would want. But I love doing that because I learn a lot from other people. And I like to be able to participate and share. Challenges like Junk Journal January and Junk Journal July and Mass Make March and little bits of lace that I did for 2024 and little bits of linen that I'm doing for 2025. I like putting that information in there so that I can keep track of what I'm doing. I don't take any medication, but medication might be something that you need to keep track of. Maybe it's side effects to the medication, or when you're taking it, or what doses, or what happens with this dose or that dose. Sure, you can have an absolute, and maybe you should have a journal dedicated to that. But with the idea of simplifying it, having all of that with tabs or index makes it easier to find, and you don't forget, well, now where did I put that? Because it's all in one spot. Exercise. Maybe you're tracking your exercise fitness routine. Books. For me, that's a huge one. I have a big section in this journal about books that I have read and suggested books from other people. In fact, my starting list for this year is based on a friend's book list from last year. The ones that she enjoyed, her 5-star reads or her most favorite reads for the year. The ones that I haven't already read, I've added to my list so I can read. So I want to have that again in my Simplified Life journal. Recipes. I'm not one to cook. I like Costco. But a lot of people are, like, maybe you're doing a specific kind of, you're wanting to experiment with specific kinds of foods or ingredients or what have you. That might be a great place to keep it. Not as a cookbook per se, but like when you're collecting recipes that you're wanting to try before you commit to having them in your recipe books, maybe this is a great place to tuck some recipes. Vacation plans, reservations, information, when you're researching and you're gathering materials about where you're going to go and how you're going to get there and who's going with you and all of the things, might be great to put in your simplified journal. Like a month at a glance. I don't necessarily plan out every day. I do that at school with my students in their lessons, of course, but I don't do that for myself. But I do want something really quick, like a month at a glance, so that I can put birthdays or anniversaries or something that's coming up, or, just like a quick note rather than a detailed daily, day-to-day kind of a planner, because that works better for me. Events. Here, I think, let's see, I've got them in this one. This is what I'm using until I get my Life Simplified journal done. But things like this. So I have, when I go to not necessarily estate sales, but auctions or shows or something like that, here you go. Here's a quote, a Jim Henson quote. I keep that tucked in there until I find a spot for it. Our Country Chicks Markets is in Enumclaw, May 9th and 10th, and then in Centralia in September. And then again, Enumclaw in December. So these are, I have 2 of these. Well, there you go. For this event, this show next year, or this year. It's this year now. And then here's a Country Chicks Spring Market, and I guess it's a different date. See, this is May 9th and 10th. Oh, here we go, March 21st and 2nd. See, 2 different flyers with the same information. Sorry, I didn't see that. But anyway, obviously I got that particular flyer, and I'll go to that. I'll go to Farm Chicks too in, I think it's the first weekend in June. But anyway, I put those kinds of things in there. That's what I mean by estate sales, auctions, junk shows, those kind of flyer things. It'll remind me for the ones I want to attend. Reflections. So if you're wanting to use it as just a really brief regular diary, maybe you don't always have time or interest in writing out things each day, but something specific or special happened and you want to jot that down. So maybe that's your Life Simplified journal is a good place for that. Retreats. My goal this year, I haven't attended a retreat since I went to Gales and Anaconda. And I would love to attend a retreat this year. So maybe I'll put that information. I'd probably lump it in with my events, but I have friends that attend several retreats a year. So maybe that's a category that you want all on your own. This is, again, specific to me, fundraisers. So I did the Yola Boca flood in November, December, and my kids are going to camp in May, and I want to get them shirts, all the students for 5th grade. So I'm thinking of doing kind of a spring fundraiser, and I keep track of who I mailed what to and their address and such. I want to be able to keep track of that. And again, just keep it in one simple spot. I don't want necessarily a separate journal for each one or a separate organizer. Maybe you're a person who's building your stash and you want to keep track of what you've already purchased, so you don't buy, 4 walnut stains or 3 scorched timbers or whatever. And a lot of people will use something like this to keep track of their newer purchases so that they don't have to, or something that they're wanting to collect. Like maybe there's an ink or something that you need and you can keep track of it there. That and your Life Simplified journal, that might be a great place to store that. So stamps, inks, color swatches, paint cards, clothing labels, I really like the way that this fabric felt. So you want to keep that particular clothing tag, so that when you're out shopping, you know which one it is that you liked, that kind of thing, for yourself or your family members. Book club. So maybe you belong to a book club and you want to have a section just for the titles that you're reading each month or each week, depending on when you meet, and the topic of conversation. Or maybe, like me, I saw on one of my Facebook groups, Bloom Where You're Planted is a reading group, and phenomenal suggestions and people in that. A lot of crafting people in there from my old scrapbooking days. Anyway, one of the ladies there turned 60 last year, and her goal was to read a book from each year of her that she had been alive. And so she did that last year, and I thought, oh, that's so cool. So maybe I will put mine, like which book I read from 1965, the year I was born, what book was published that year, and what book I chose to read. I think in hers it was 1967 was From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, which is a book that I love to read out loud to my kids every year. And I probably won't choose that one just because I've read it so many times. But that idea, so you just pick a book each year, the author, the title, and write it down. It's a great challenge for me personally, and I thought it was brilliant. Maybe you do a Bible study with a group or individually, and a Bible planner is a fabulous thing, but maybe your lifestyle works better to have a lot of that organized into one. Maybe you don't want to have a big, huge book. You just want to have a section in a book. And correspondence, maybe keeping track of, for me, like the 52 cards section, or somebody sent you something and you want to make sure you send a thank you card. I was horrible about that last year, and I am determined to be a little bit better. Last year stunk for many reasons, but that doesn't excuse me from not honoring the people who were kind enough to think of me. So those are just some of the category options that I came up with. And then I looked at those and I thought, what do I want in my journal? And so I wanted an annual or a calendar or a year at a glance. In school, we call it a YAG, a year at a glance, just to give you a quick through. So mine, I'd want like a small section for each of the 12 months. And so I included that. Books is big for me, ones that I have read, and I need one section or one set of pages for each month. I read about 30 books a month, so I wanted to make sure I had room for at least 40 to 50 titles in case I got crazy and read more. That doesn't include the books I read for the kids, like picture books for lessons and such. I'm just saying for me, personal books. And then the books where people suggest to me. I listen to other people and what they liked and what they didn't like and such. And so that's, for me, something I definitely want in my life simplified. Challenges and collaborations. Well, I take part in those, but I don't need a huge section for each of those. So I could put those together in a signature. So I need an entire signature for the year at a glance. I need an entire signature for books, but I can split a signature. So one signature for those two items, but that's, again, me. And then I've got the book press in the middle. And then the next section, correspondence. So that'll be letters, cards, and then the 52 weeks. I want to mark down who I sent it to each week so I don't forget and send it to the same person twice, kind of a thing. So I need a full section for that. And then holidays and events and quotes. And you know what I didn't put in here? Oh, I guess in correspondence, I should have put addresses. So these two addresses will go with correspondence. So that might be a separate section of correspondence. And then holidays and events and quotes, I will, like the shows and things like that. And then like the quote card. And I'll have all of those. So that's what I need and what I did here. Okay, I'm going to quickly, because I've been talking way too long. Again, I hope it was helpful. When I'm choosing my papers, I'm going to do the same thing that I did last time. I'll pull out all my different ledger. I like this one a lot. I didn't use this one on the last one, but I think I might use it in the next one. This one I probably won't use because I have to go in and line each page. It's very old. This one was from a newer ledger. It was nice and sturdy. I can use that. This one's from 1937, so not quite 100 years old, but the paper's really fragile. So if I want to use it this way, I'll absolutely use it in a journal, but I need to reinforce it or do something different. Again, a different ledger. This one's really sturdy, don't need to do anything. This one is probably from the 1960s, but the paper's sturdy enough, so I'll use that one. I don't have to do anything for it. This, absolutely love it, but again, it's old and it's thin, maybe not the best choice. This is a similar ledger, but it's a little bit newer, so I can use this without having to worry about it. So bottom line is I'll do the same thing. I'll pick 6 sections and include the spine that I did before. And I can show you how to sew those in if you like. I'm happy to do that. I'm going to use the sewing machine simply because I prefer it, but it's the same. You can do the same thing with the 5-hole pamphlet stitch. And here's where I'm asking you what you want to see. At the beginning of each signature, I find that if I use cardstock, you know, a little bit thicker cardstock, I have a sturdier signature. So at the beginning, I like to wrap each of my sections with cardstock. Sometimes I'll put card in the middle too, just depending on how fragile the paper is, but I like to do that. So what I did with this one is I had mentioned that I like to be able to see. So I'll get a card or something and I want to put it in, or maybe it's my correspondence section and I want to put stamps in here. In fact, I just bought some stamps. That would be what I would use. I found out that if I'm just mailing a flattish card, not several embellishments, I can send it to pretty much anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world for $1.65. And so I bought a set of those because I had just sent something to the UK or Australia or Spain or wherever. So I could put my stamps in there. So my question to you is, do you just want to see me to show you how I put in the signatures, or would you like to see what I did for each of these signatures, the cardstock page for each signature? And I'll show you. These are all either glassine or plastic bags for the most part, with paper. So here is the front of that signature, and here is the back. And it's a regular envelope, and I cut it in half, and I put it on each side of that hinge that I put in there. So I can show you how to do these when I put it together if you're wanting to see it. This one will just be glued down on the front page because this was my year at a glance. And so this front page is just a bonus. And then this is January, February, March, that kind of thing. So I intended to glue this down, and then it's a pocket and I can still see whatever's above it. It's not a big pocket where it closes it off. And again, I like using baby's breath, so I can show you how I made this. This is a double pocket, same idea. I'll glue this down on a couple these two sides to make a pocket here and a pocket here. Here is a large glassine bag, or envelope, I should say, just sewn onto a hinge. And here is one. It's based on one I did probably 3 or 4 years ago, and it is a clear transparency film pocket, and then I sewed an additional piece with the baby's breath on the top. There's probably a lot of glare there. Just using the policy closure. So if you're wanting to see how I made that insert, I'm happy to share it, but I just want to know what you'd like to see. Here's that pocket glued on to the flower press. A quote over here. This one, I used paper because I found that I don't have to open it and close it like an envelope, but I've almost always got something, like maybe I've got a postcard or a vocabulary card or a receipt or something like that. So this is a pocket, and then again, I'll glue this down, and then this would be a pocket, a little bit bigger pocket. So that's just a super simple spine double pocket. And it's the same thing on this side, but on this side I put some dried baby's breath under a piece of transparency film, but again, a double pocket. This one's just a single simple pocket, top pocket, bookmarks, library card inserts, that kind of thing, because this is my, this wasn't the book section, that was another section. Oh, but this is where holidays and events. So before I put the smaller business cards for people that I see at the show, I wanted a pocket that I could easily access. And so it'll be glued to 2 sides. And then the flower was just because it was pretty. The same type of thing on the back, but I had a little itty bitty stem. I don't even know if you can see that, a baby's breath. And so baby's breath I use a lot because it goes down so flat. It doesn't create a lot of bulk. And then here was the remake of that glassine envelope with the baby's breath in the flap. And on the back there, I just used a pastry bag, and to make it fit, I just folded it. You can unfold it as needed, put it back in there. So before I do the next one, and I show you that, so I can start probably Monday or Tuesday, I would just like to know what you want me to show you. Do you want me to show you, I've got several, well here, I've got this piece ready to go, this flower press ready to go, other than labels on there. And this was the journal that it was going to go in, which is great because I will cut a full piece and I will put I'll put another piece of canvas on it with a little bit of chipboard on each side. I won't put chipboard in the middle, but I will put it on each side just to give it a little bit more stability. That's a learn from my mistake. But this one might be a little bit smaller than I want, so I may use, like, this is just a crocheted piece. And that's another thing. I want to be able to sew a button on here like I did on this one. I've got large buttons, but I love that closure for this just because it's so fast and so easy, and it accommodates no matter the bulk. But again, this is just sewn down. I don't have anything stable in here. So same thing with the quilted one. Here is another yo-yo one, but before I put anything in it, I would put, you know, 2 sections of chipboard on this and then some canvas over it, leaving the spine free of chipboard just to make it more stable. And then there's this one, and then this one. This one's already pretty stable because I have it on some, whatever that is, burlap, and it's pretty sturdy, so it wouldn't need much. Maybe I'll end up using this one. And then I've got just the fabric pieces for the inside liners. French ticking. Love, love, love it, but I would use a full piece instead of the partial piece I used, and I would absolutely put something down on this to make it more sturdy. In fact, what I'd probably do is I would have like maybe an inch and a half in the spine, because that doesn't need to be sturdy, and then I would sew the chipboard to either side so that I have a lot more stability and a lot more control when I put it into my journal. I've got some wool here, and then there's some tapestry, upholstery fabric kind of a thing. So if there's something that you'd like to see, just let me know what you want to see, because the whole purpose for this is to be able to help you create a journal that you are happy with, that accommodates that need of a life simplified journal. Okay, I'm almost afraid to see how long I've talked, but please learn from my mistakes. Don't do the same things I do. I've been doing it a long time, so I know I can work around this. Well, not a long time, but you know, long enough to know that I can work around these challenges. But if I were fairly new to this or had only been doing it a shorter amount of time, I would have walked away from the journal and nope, it's not worth it. I'm not doing it, because I wouldn't have necessarily known the fixes. So I'm just trying to prevent you from making some of the same mistakes that I made. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for putting up with my yammering. Take care and happy creating.